Masonry, revealed and illustrated with a sketch of life, abduction, and murder of William Morgan, taken from the Proceedings of the Anti-Masonic Convention and the confession of Henry L. Valance, one of the murderers. William Morgan was born on the 7th day of August, 1774, in Culpeper County, Virginia. His occupation was that of bricklayer and stonemason. Having accumulated by his industry a sufficient fund, he commenced business as a merchant in Richmond, Virginia. It is said that he was a captain in a militia regiment and that he was present at the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815. He married Lucinda Pendleton in October 1819, who was left with 2 infant children at the time of his abduction. He removed from Virginia in the fall of 1821 and commenced the business of a brewer near York in Upper Canada. The destruction of his property by fire soon after reduced him to poverty. He removed to Rochester in the state of New York and resumed his original occupation. An inflammation of the eyes contracted soon after incapacitated him for labor and rendered the pressure of poverty more severe. From Rochester, he removed to Batavia, where he resided in the summer of 1826. William Morgan was a member of the Masonic fraternity and advanced as far as the degree of Royal Arch in the mysteries of that society. In the summer of 1826, it became known that he was preparing for publication a work in which the obligations, secret signs, and ceremonies of Freemasonry were to be made public. It was also understood that David C. Miller, an entered apprentice Mason and a printer at Batavia, was engaged or to be engaged in printing that work. The knowledge of these facts excited great commotion among the members of the Masonic fraternity in that vicinity and a wide extent of surrounding country. There was a great heat and intemperance of expression in relation to the expected work, an open vow by members that it should never see the light. Consultations were held among them as to the course to be pursued in relation to the contemplated work, and it was understood finally to have been determined that its publication was to be prevented at all hazards. It would appear that there were several different and distinct projects devised to produce this result, which either were not attempted or failed in their execution. Arrangements were made for the assembling at Batavia on the night of the 8th of September of members of the Masonic fraternity from different and distant places. They came from Buffalo, Lockport, Canandaigua, and Rochester, and expectations were entertained that there would also be a party from Canada. None of them arrived at Batavia until in the night, when they assembled to the number of 50 or more. The object of this party was to suppress the publication of the work by procuring the manuscript papers and the printed sheets. For this purpose, an attack upon the printing office of Miller was contemplated, and it would seem also the forcible removal of Morgan from Batavia to effect a separation between him and Miller. Eli Bruce, the sheriff of Niagara County, had been requested to prepare, and did actually prepare, a cell in the jail of that county for the reception of Morgan, whose forcible abduction by this band of midnight conspirators was confidently expected. Colonel Edward Sawyer of Canandaigua headed or commanded this party, but they failed to effect their object and dispersed a little before daylight the next morning. It is supposed that they were deterred from their purpose by a knowledge of the fact that Miller was aware of their intentions and had prepared firearms and other ample means to defend both his person and his property from the attacks of violence. Many of the persons composing this party are known to have been selected and delegated for the express purpose of going to Batavia to assist in suppressing the publication of Morgan's book, and perhaps the numbers composing this party and the different and distant places from which they came illustrate more forcibly than any other single fact the extent of the combination to suppress the publication of the book. On Sunday morning, September 10th, Nicholas Chesebro of Canigua, master of the lodge at that place, applied to Jeffrey Chipman, a magistrate at Canigua, for a warrant. Chesebro came to the office with Ebenezer Kingsley, who made a complaint against William Morgan for having taken away a shirt and cravat which he had borrowed of Kingsley. So the best they could do was saying that he didn't return a borrowed jacket. So the bitch-ass magistrate issued the warrant upon the oath of Kingsley and directed to Chesebro of one of the corners of Ontario County and handed to him. Chesebro, together with Holloway Hayward, a constable, Henry Howard, Harris Seymour, Moses Roberts, Joseph Schofield, all Freemasons of Canigua, left that place for Batavia at about 10 o'clock the same morning in an extra stage hired by Chesebro. The party were joined by 4 other individuals, all Freemasons, at different places before they reached Batavia. They stopped to take supper at James Ganson's house in Stafford, 6 miles east of Batavia. Dr. Samuel S. Butler of Stafford was then introduced to some of the party and informed that they had a warrant for Morgan. Dr. Butler went to Batavia the same evening and was requested to inform Nathan Follett and William Seaver, then master of the Batavia Lodge, that the party was coming. He did so on his return, met the Canandaigua party about 2 miles from Batavia, and informed Ganson that Follett had sent them not to come. The stage turned about. The party that originally started from Canandaigua went to Batavia on foot, and the remainder returned. The next morning, early, Morgan was arrested and taken to the public house where the party had slept. An extra stagecoach was procured, and the party left Batavia for Canandaigua with Morgan in their custody. Miller attempted to procure the release of Morgan just as the carriage was starting, but he was pushed aside, and the coach was driven off very fast. Chesebro, being on the outside with the driver and urging him to drive fast until they should get out of the county. The driver appeared to feel uneasy about the proceedings, but was pacified by Ganson's assurance that he would save him harmless from all responsibility. Chesebro repeatedly looked back and said they should not take Morgan alive. They arrived at Canandaigua with Morgan the same day, and in the evening took him before the magistrate who issued the warrant, by whom he was examined and discharged. Loton Lawson, appearing as a witness on behalf of Morgan. Chesebro then immediately applied to the same magistrate for a warrant against Morgan for a debt of about $2, claimed to be due from him to Aaron Ackley, a tavern keeper, which debt Chesebro alleged was assigned to him. Judgment was entered against Morgan for $2.69, debt and costs, and an execution immediately issued, which was put into the hands of Holloway Hayward, then present. Morgan took off his coat and offered it to the constable to levy upon for the debt. The constable declined receiving it and arrested Morgan and committed him to the jail of Canandaigua the same evening on the execution. He remained in custody in the Canandaigua jail until the evening of the next day. Immediately after Morgan was committed to jail, Loton Lawson, a farmer residing near Canandaigua, procured a horse and went to Rochester for the same night, a distance of 28 miles, and returned the next morning a little after breakfast. He went to bed after his return and informed the innkeeper where he slept that some gentlemen from Rochester would call for him in the course of the day. On the 12th of September, Burge Smith and John Whitney of Rochester took the stage from that place in the morning for Canandaigua. They were joined by James Gillis at Victor, 10 miles distant from Canandaigua, and all three arrived at the latter place early in the afternoon the same day. Smith and Whitney called upon Loton Lawson. In the same evening of the same day, September 12th, Loton Lawson called at the jail a little after dark and asked for William Morgan. The jailer was absent, and Lawson informed the jailer's wife that he wished to pay the debt for which Morgan was confined and take him away. Mrs. Hall, the jailer's wife, declined accepting the amount of the execution on the ground that she did not know the amount, and also refused to permit Lawson to have any private conversation with Morgan. Lawson asked Morgan, however, in the presence of Mrs. Hall, if he would go home with him, if he would pay the debt and take him out, to which Morgan answered that he would. Lawson then expressed great anxiety to get Morgan out that night and pressed Mrs. Hall to receive the amount of the debt, which she still declined. Lawson went out and returned soon with another person whom Mrs. Hall cannot identify and insisted on her receiving the amount of the execution. Mrs. Hall refused. He went away and returned again, reiterating his request with the same effect. He went away again and soon returned with Edward Sawyer, who advised Mrs. Hall to receive the amount of the debt and let Morgan go. She still refused. She subsequently consented to discharge Morgan at the request of Nicholas Chesebro, who was the real plaintiff in the execution, and took the keys of the prison for the purpose of opening Morgan's cell. Before she opened the cell, Lawson gave a single whistle at the front door, which brought a man to this jail steps. Morgan's cell was unlocked. He came out, and Lawson took him by the arm and went toward the door of the prison hall, which was unlocked by a person on the outside, and they went out. Before they left the jail steps, Morgan was seized with violence by Lawson and the person who was called there by his whistle. Morgan struggled and cried murdered once or twice, resisting as much as possible, and in the struggle his hat fell off. Edward Sawyer and Nicholas Chesebro were waiting near the jail steps, and when the struggle commenced, they followed Morgan and the two men who were with them and who were going eastwardly from the jail. Chesebro came up with them and stopped Morgan's outcry by thrusting a handkerchief or something similar into his mouth. Sawyer gave a distinct rap upon the curb of a well, at which signal Hiram Hubbard drove up with a 2-horse carriage which had been harnessed and was waiting for the purpose. He overtook the party, having Morgan in their possession, a few rods east of the jail, when the two of them thrust Morgan into the carriage and then got in themselves.